everyone. Good morning, everyone. I wonder who was here last night when we started talking a little bit about effective ways of communicating according to the Bible, according to Jesus. Who was here last night? All right, most of you. That's great. That's great. So today we're going to be talking a little bit more of the nitty-gritty of mental health. So I am a psychotherapist. I've been working in the mental health field for about 20 years. I had a chance to be also in research here in Albuquerque, actually, and also in San Diego, where I started in my profession. And the world of mental health is fascinating, and it's just, I would say, in its beginning. It's in its infancy, because nowadays, we are doing so much research, and with new technology, we're able to find out a lot of things that even as close as 20, 30 years ago, we would not even dream of. My daughter, who's actually studying a PhD in neurosciences, she grew up here in Albuquerque. We lived here from 2004 to 2014 or something like that. Then she graduated from high school in El Paso, where we live now. She went to Southwestern Adventist University, got a bachelor's degree in psychology, and she went to Korea as a missionary. I was telling you that I was a missionary in Japan, and the video here was inviting us to become a volunteer missionary, and if you have considered that, I would highly encourage you to do that. And I will tell you that your faith will be tested, and that is a good thing. So volunteer as a missionary is a wonderful, wonderful thing. Encourage the younger ones to do that at least 1 year in their life. So Audrey went to Korea as a missionary. Then she came back, and she was a year in Kansas doing research. In Korea, she sent an email to one of her professors, saying, I'd like to be involved in research, because she wanted to do a PhD. And so she did some work in a neuroscience lab in Korea. She did an internship in Kansas in another mental health research institute. And then when she applied to a PhD, she was accepted at several universities. She visited several universities. And you know where she ended up after traveling the world? Right here at UNM. Right here at UNM. She's in her second year of a PhD program, and they're doing fascinating things. They are teaching rats a certain task. And after they teach a rat a certain task, they cut off their heads, they take out their little brains, they slice the little brains into very thin slices, and then they look under the microscope to see if there have been any changes after these rats learn certain tasks. Isn't that fascinating? What do you think about that kind of research? Disgusting? A little bit, right? A little bit. But I guess it's better to do that than to do that with humans, right? So to a large degree, the brains of mammals, they kind of work the same. We get an input, maybe sound, and right now you're hearing my sound because it's picked up by the microphone, these sound waves that my throat and my mouth are pushing out. And then they travel through the air, and they get picked up by your ears. And then inside your ear, there's several mechanisms there that turn this sound wave into an electrical wave inside your ear. And now you have this tiny electrical impulse traveling through your head and through your brain. And there is a neuron that sort of picks up that stimuli, that sound wave that was transformed into an electrical wave. And this neuron fires, and it releases certain chemicals that get picked up by another neuron next to it, and this other neuron also fires and delivers other chemicals, And that's how the message gets transferred into your brain until it gets to this area where we try to understand what it is that I'm saying. And all of that happens in an instant without any input from our frontal cortex here, which is, I think, fascinating, right? Porque yo pudiera hablar en español y aunque ustedes me están escuchando, no sé cuántos entendieron lo que estoy diciendo. ¿Cuántos entienden lo que estoy diciendo? A few of you, okay. Right? And that's my point. I said, because I could be speaking Spanish, and then even though some of you are hearing me, you're not understanding me. Because that stimuli, that electrical impulse went into your brain, but you didn't have a database to actually try to make sense of that. Right? So when we speak English, you have an English database. And when these electrical impulses come to that area, which is called Broca's area, then we can make sense of that. And like, oh, okay, I can follow you. But we can hear speech and, of course, not understand it because we don't have a file, a brain file for that specific language. Now, if I spoke Tagalog, that would be a different story, right? For some of you. But I don't speak a word of Tagalog. So I'm sorry about that. So the field of mental health is fascinating. Nowadays, when I was here in Albuquerque, we were working on research to try to be able to diagnose, for example, schizophrenia by using imaging. So right now, if you have, I don't know, a cough or something, they'll do an X-ray, right? And maybe the X-ray will show a little spot because X-ray can only show one side of your lungs. And then if you find a little spot, then they might want to do an MRI to see if that spot that they can see on the X-ray is actually like a tumor that is round and how wide it is and how long it is. So an MRI can do that. So to diagnose medical issues, we have a lot of ways of doing that. We have lab work and we have X-rays, imaging, and all that. For mental health, how do you think we diagnose schizophrenia, for example? Is there a lab test that can diagnose schizophrenia? Not really. Is there an image that we can do of the brain to see if you have schizophrenia? Not really. So we're not there yet. We think there is some markers that in the near future we will be able to diagnose mental illnesses with maybe even with some labs. I was looking at some research that for depression there is this marker that maybe we can start looking for. But I was working in research here because when people have schizophrenia, one of the things that happens is that they get bothered by a lot of input, but by a lot of stimuli. And right now, for example, there might be some noises going on in the background. There might be your friend next to you trying to catch your attention, and you try not to pay attention to that, right? Because I want to listen to that guy. And so there's a lot of things going on. There's some lights in the background. And so, but most humans are able to ignore all of these extra stimuli and concentrate on something, right? And that's a good thing. Sometimes when people have a psychotic disorder like schizophrenia, they lose that ability. And imagine that, everything that you are hearing, everything that you are seeing, you get stimulated in the same way. What kind of a life would that be? You would be bothered all the time, and you would not be able to pay attention to a lot of things, right? So you wouldn't be able to focus, right? Yes, it would be. So some people that have schizophrenia or a psychotic disorder like schizoaffective disorder, they kind of lose that ability. So we can actually test for that. That's one test that we can actually test for. There's a certain wave that the brain emits when the stimuli is being ignored. All right, it's called the P50 wave. And so we're able to now test for that. So what we do in this research is we We have people at this very sophisticated machine called the MEG, magnetoencephalography, and we give them two stimuli, two ticks, at different intervals, like half a second, a quarter of a second, almost a second. And so the brain of someone who doesn't have a psychotic disorder is able to very quickly start ignoring the second tick because it knows the second tick is coming. And so a normal person, a normal brain, the P50 wave would be very low because it doesn't, because it ignores the second tick. Are you following? Is this making sense? So it ignores the second tick. On people with schizophrenia, the second tick, the brain doesn't ignore the second tick. And the P50 waves like 0.9 or 0.8 or very close to 1, because it means that it took the second tick at the same intensity as the first tick. So we are very close to being able to diagnose some of these mental illnesses actually using imaging and actually using, in the future, lab tests. So, but for now, what do we use to diagnose mental illnesses? Counseling? Yeah, we use a diagnostic interview, right? So we meet with people and we ask them questions, and then we determine whether or not you meet that criteria for certain illnesses. Sometimes we can also meet with family members that can tell us a little bit more about the behavior, of this person, and then we can help us determine if that person meets certain criteria. So, now, do you think the Bible talks about mental health? Yes. It does. It does. Now, the Bible is not a diagnostic tool, right? So we actually have a book that's about this thick called the DSM-5. We're in the 5th edition. Is anyone familiar with that book? A couple of you. The DSM-5 is called Diagnostic Statistical Manual, 5th edition. So this is the book that tells us everything about all the mental health illnesses that are diagnosable. And I was lucky enough, I guess I'm old enough, to have had the privilege of working with Dr. Munoz. Dr. Munoz was young when he and other doctors, he was a psychiatrist, they came out with the actual diagnosis for schizophrenia, for example. He went out every day for a long time. They designed this research that we didn't have a good diagnosis for schizophrenia, and he and other researchers went out and interviewed lots of people, and they said, this is what they all share in common, so let us all agree that this is going to be the diagnosis for schizophrenia. He became the APA president at one point, the American Psychiatric Association president, because of that research. Really, really important. But when do you remember the Bible talking about mental health? And like I said, the Bible is not the DSM-5, and the DSM-5 is not the Bible, but the Bible certainly mentions several instances where people seem to be suffering from mental health illnesses. Does anyone remember any of those times? Yes, when do you remember? King Saul. Oh, King Saul. King Saul was a force to be reckoned with, right? What do you remember about King Saul? Maybe an instance when you could have said, I don't know that that's normal.
Well, he threw a javelin at David.
That's right, yeah. David had just won a battle for King Saul. And he had delivered a very important victory to King Saul. And after that, David finds himself playing an instrument to appease King Saul. And King Saul, the Bible says, is across the hall. And the Bible says that an evil spirit came upon Saul. And he grabbed his javelin and he tried to pin him like a mosquito, And I can imagine just David just playing, I don't remember where he was playing, the harp, maybe the harp. And he sees the javelin coming, right? Oh, it just kind of goes like that, right? So, what do you think may have been happening at that point with King Saul? Jealousy, huh? He was disgusted. Yeah, okay. What else? Demonic possession. Okay. Now, from a mental health perspective, maybe he was getting some sort of delusional thinking. He may have been thinking he is going to some degree, which was, some people were saying already that he may be a good king, and maybe he got some delusional thinking, and like, he's going to do something against me right now, and I better kill him right now. It is unfortunate. I've talked to hundreds, if not thousands, of people with schizophrenia, and a lot of the auditory hallucinations that they hear, they are negative. Most of the time. Sometimes they have these auditory hallucinations that tell them to kill themselves, or very few instances to kill others. I had a patient who got together with this girl. The girl also had schizophrenia, and then she got pregnant, and they came to my office one day because he wasn't sure if he should do what the voices were telling him to do. The girl was pregnant. She was like 8 months pregnant. She was very pregnant. I guess you can't be very pregnant. Either you're pregnant or you're not pregnant, right? I take that back. You can't be very... But she was 8 months pregnant. And the voices were telling him that he should take the baby out now with a knife. And he wasn't sure if he should do that or not. So they came to see me so I could help him decide. And of course, we had to hospitalize him, and we convinced him to come into the hospital and rest for a little while, and try to help him that way. So the baby was born, and he lived, and I haven't seen him in a long time. But many times the voices that people with a psychotic disorder will hear, they're negative, and I could tell you lots of stories of things that people would hear. Sometimes they're not really negative. Sometimes they're a little bit interesting. I had a patient who was convinced that his father wanted to date his girlfriend, and he was very disturbed because of that, and he couldn't really be at peace, and he didn't know what he should do against his father, because he actually lived with his father, and he liked his father. And so we've been talking for some time about how to handle this situation. And then I asked him, "Do you have a girlfriend?" And he said, "No, but I still think my father wants to date her." So my children would sometimes come, when I came back from work, they would always ask me, "Did you have any funny patients today?" And sometimes I would tell them stories like that, and they thought it was really funny. But it's actually pretty sad, right? So King David, coming back to King David, he seemed to maybe be having some sort of delusional thinking about David, all right? Do you remember any other stories in the Bible? Huh? Oh, that's a big one, right? Yeah, Nebuchadnezzar, what was he doing? Do you remember?
Well, he ended up grazing in the field, and of course, his countenance totally changed. He lost control of his physical appearance. Fingernails grew. So, yeah, he was out of control.
It was pretty bad. The Bible says he ate grass like an ox, and his body was bathed with the dew of heaven, until his hair grew like the feathers of an eagle, and his nails like the claws of a bird. How's that for a king?
He's a mess.
Yes, yes. Something happened to him. Something happened to him. Now, we may know what happened before, and that's during, and we probably also remember what happened after that. But that's also another example of something was going on that was very strange. Any other time in the Bible that you remember that could be related to a mental illness? Yeah. Anytime anyone defies God. That's possible, right? Yeah, if you defy God, I mean, who in their right mind would want to get into something like that against God? Yes, sir.
How about the
Demoniac in Gadara, the gathering, right? Whoa, yeah, that to me is probably the closest to a diagnosis of schizophrenia that I could see in the Bible. Not 100% sure that he meets the current modern criteria for schizophrenia, but there was definitely something going on with him, right? Now, was that a mental illness? And you might remember, Jesus came out to the city of Gadara, and Gadara was in the upper part of the region, very south of the Sea of Galilee, but on the other side of the Jordan. Okay, so in between Samaria and Galilee, but on the east side of the Jordan River. And so they went there, and as he went there, this man came out, and he was disheveled, and he would cut himself all the time. And there might be a clinical explanation for cutting. And he was very strong also. They would try to restrain him, and he would just break the shackles. And now, I've never seen that type of extra human strength. So that's what makes me think, maybe it was mental illness, but maybe he was actually possessed, right? And the Bible says that Jesus talked to the demon that had possessed this man, and his name was Legion, because they were many, right? And he actually, Jesus took out the demon, and the demon went into some pigs, and then people were very upset at Jesus. But that's a whole sermon, right? What were the Jews doing, raising pigs? What for? Right? They were not supposed to be eating them, right? But anyway, I remember one time my pastor called me and he said, "Would you please come with me? I need to go and see this girl who seems to be possessed, and we need to do an exorcism." And I don't know why he called me, but I was very afraid. I was very afraid. And right at that moment, I've never prayed so hard in my life that Jesus would blot out all of my transgressions and make him invisible, so that, because what if this demon had to go somewhere? I was really scared. So we finally go to see this girl, and when I was a kid, I watched the movie The Exorcist. Does anyone remember that movie? It is the only horror movie that I've ever watched in my life. I was cured from that after watching that movie. That's not something that Christians should be watching, okay? And if you're not very young, you would probably remember that movie came out in the 80s, in the 70s. Oh, that's how young I was. I wasn't even born then. I watched it on VHS, probably in the late 70s then. I was really young. I was a child, and I never watched another horror. Don't watch horror movies. They don't do anything for your mental health. So that's the only experience I had with being possessed, and I thought that this girl the head was gonna. And so I was really scared. We went in. And it turned out the girl was just depressed. She was clinically depressed. And we didn't have to do any exorcism. I was really, really scared. So the man possessed seems to have. Sometimes when people cut, there's something going on inside of them. They are really sad, maybe even depressed, or they're really anxious, and they have no other outlet. And the emotional pain is so strong that then by cutting, they relieve some of that, or release some of that mental anguish, and somehow transfer that pain into physical pain, and that to them is an outlet. So cutting is very often, we see it a lot. All right, Pastor, it is 10 o'clock. Can I finish by 10:15, 10:20? 10:30? Yeah, 10:30? Okay, at the most 10:30. All right. Oh, okay. All right. And that's my signal. Okay. All right. So, needless to say, although the Bible is not really written for the mental health field, we know what is written for. I think it has enough of these issues going on throughout the Old and the New Testament to let us know that God understands what we are going through, right? And to a very large degree, we all experience some traits of mental illnesses and some traits of like personality disorders also. And it doesn't mean that if something really sad happened in your life, whatever that might be, that if you're really, really sad after that, it doesn't mean that you have a mental illness, right? It's normal to feel sad after something devastating happening in your life. I would say it would be abnormal not to feel like that. And our emotions, God gave us our emotions. And sometimes we go overboard with our emotions. And sometimes, even in church, sometimes we fail to understand the importance of emotions. And sometimes we go like, we can't have any emotions, and we have to be like robots. And you can't say aloud, amen. That would be disrespectful in the house of the Lord. And then we have these long faces. I don't think God wants us to be like that. But then sometimes we would go overboard, and we have church services with very loud music and loud drums, and the beat is going, and they have even smoke coming out, and there's some Seventh-day Adventist churches like that. And so why? Because we believe that we have to entertain and give a good product to our listeners. And so somewhere in the middle, I think that's where we should be at. But let's talk a little bit about some of the actual diagnosable mental illnesses. For example, depression. Depression is one of those illnesses that has found its way into the colloquial or normal type of discussions. So we often say, well, he's depressed, or she's depressed, or I'm depressed. And there's a big difference between being sad about something and being actually clinically depressed. So in order for somebody to be depressed, you have to be really, really down and to the point of crying, or crying sometimes, but you have to be like that all day. Now, this clinical feature is going to be affecting your sleep. Most of the time, people oversleep when they are depressed. Sometimes they can't sleep. But this has to happen for at least 2 weeks in this state in order for a diagnosis of depression to be considered. Now, your eating habits are going to be affected also. So most of the time, people stop eating. They have what is called anhedonia, so they lack the ability to feel pleasure from anything. So if you used to like playing the piano, you're not playing the piano. If you used to like to eat, you're not eating. If you used to like to go out for a walk, you're not doing that. You're not exercising. It really affects your whole life. It also affects maybe your energy. You lack energy. You feel like you're actually tired. You feel like you just ran a marathon all day long. And you have this energy, this lack of energy, and you walk slower, you speak slower, and this is markedly different than your normal way of talking. So there are some people who speak a little slower than others, right? There's some people who speak really fast. But when you're clinically depressed, that is going to be very different. You're going to be moving very differently, very slowly. You also, yes?
Actually,
It immobilizes you. It could be to some point that you don't actually want to do anything and you stay in bed all day, right? Because of this lack of energy, you just stay in bed all day. You don't bathe? Not you, sister, but people that feel like this, they don't bathe. They hardly eat. They also have this very deep sense of worthlessness. I am not worth anything. And to some degree, these feelings are so deeply rooted and they've been going on for so long that now if you are feeling worthless, you believe that you shouldn't be living. And they end up having suicidal thoughts. Now, have you heard that antidepressants cause suicidality? You probably have heard that. It was in the news more so many years ago, but there's some truth to that. It's not that antidepressants cause people to commit suicide, but here's what happens. So someone is feeling like this, all of those symptoms that I just explained, and they are feeling worthless, and they think they don't deserve to die, which is of course not true, but they want to die, but they lack the energy and the motivation to do anything, right? They feel so bad that they don't even have the energy to do anything against them. Then they give them an antidepressant, and sometimes the antidepressants work very effectively. So now all of a sudden they have the energy and they have the motivation, but they still have the suicidality thinking in their mind. So that's when some people end up attempting suicide, when they were depressed and suicidal, and then very quickly they have energy and motivation, and now they feel, and then now they can carry out the suicidal thoughts that they had. So that's a little bit about how that happens. So should people that are clinically depressed, now, of course, in order to come up with a clinical diagnosis of depression, you have to see a professional, right? And I would caution you against, looking stuff up on Google and then say, I meet the criteria, meet this criteria, meet this criteria. You can do that, but it's better if a professional does that, because the professional has a lot of experience, right? And they've seen a lot of different cases, and they are better able to determine, according to their experience, whether this is truly anhedonia or energy, or this might be still maybe sadness or a transient sort of episode. That is not going to last very long. But here's the question. Should people that are clinically determined to have depression, should they get on antidepressants? Should they get on medication for depression? I might be opening a can of worms here, but I am going to be brave and bold and ask the question. Somebody said no? You say no. Okay. You have any, why do you think no?
Because they can figure out what is driving the depression
That is true. They could do that. Any other thoughts? Should people clinically depressed, not just sadness? Now we've determined this person meets criteria for clinical depression. Should they get on meds? What do you say, sister?
I say yes, from personal experience, because sometimes when you are so down in the hole, nothing really works. And then you start self-medicating with things that are not so good.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that. Pastor?
I would go with case by case.
Uh-huh.
Case by case basis, because some cases every case is different, obviously. I like the idea of finding root causes, because for somebody that might be enough. For somebody else it might be a chemical imbalance or something more physical in nature that is not just easily going to be resolved by exercise or anything else, lifestyle. So every case needs to be a study, and the solution needs to be determined based on that.
Yep. Yes, in the back you have an opinion. Yeah, go ahead. Thank you. Thank you. I love that analogy of poking holes. I had not looked at it that way, but I really like that analogy of poking holes enough for the psychotherapist to have something to work with. Very good. You have, okay, go ahead, please, sister. Yes. Yes. Yes, there is a treatment called ECT, electroconvulsive therapy, that seems to be very effective. It sort of went out of practice for many years, but it has made a comeback because the way they were doing ECT in the past, 20 years ago, wasn't very well understood, and the electrical charges were not well regulated, and they were causing some damage. They were breaking bones and breaking teeth, but nowadays it's very uneventful. You see somebody undergoing ECT and nothing seems to be happening, only as they are connected in their brain. But it is a very effective treatment. Yes, sir. I like that. That is, I would agree to a large extent. There are many illnesses that happen as a result of our separation from God, right? Yeah. Okay. Yes, sir. In the back. Thank you. Thank you for that. I agree. I think our diet ends up influencing a lot of what we are going through. And our environment, of course, it does too. Now, I do believe that the brain is an organ. Do you agree with me? Like the heart is an organ, right? And later on, I'll tell you a little bit about what's going on with my heart, but that's another issue. And sometimes the organs, the lungs, the kidneys, the pancreas, the heart, the brain, sometimes they also get sick, right? We live in this world of sin that affects, this was not God's plan. I mean, I was not supposed to be this short, okay? But because of sin, we suffered greatly. And our brain organ also suffers greatly. We do know, for example, that there is this neurotransmitter in the brain that when people are depressed, there is less of this going on in the brain. And we know that because also if we give somebody an SSRI, a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, we give that to people and allow for more serotonin in the brain to be present. So here's what happens. This neuron gets a stimuli and releases serotonin. And then this other neuron is supposed to accept the serotonin. But when people are depressed, this neuron, the ones that's receiving the serotonin, for some reason receives less of the serotonin. So what this medication does, it inhibits, it stops this neuron from accepting the serotonin back. So then the serotonin remains in this region for a longer period of time to allow this other neuron to accept more serotonin. All right? So we know that's what this medication does. And we know that for most people, not for everybody, but for most people, when we give them antidepressants, if this is something that is happening, they do perk up. Within about 2 to 3 weeks or so, they do perk up. So medication has its place in medicine, and this is my opinion. However, there are other treatments like ECT that you mentioned, and they've also done studies where they get a group of people, and this is very well studied and very well established. They get a group of people that are depressed. And they give them antidepressants. To half, they give them antidepressants. And to the other half, they put them on an exercise regimen. And this exercise regimen is not so much strength training, but more of what they call cardio exercise or aerobic type of exercise. The type of exercise that makes you tired, that makes your heart rate go up, that makes you sweat, like walking fast or running or biking or swimming, something that type of exercise. And what do you think the results are? The results tell us that exercise is as effective as antidepressants. So exercise does seem to regulate some of these chemical imbalances in the brain. Huh? Creates more blood flow. Yes, exactly. And so that seems to really help everything going on in the brain. Now, that's wonderful news, right? Now, for most of our patients that come to our hospital, when we tell them this and we give them a choice, what do you think they choose? The easy way out, unfortunately. Yeah, most of our patients, and I've seen it with my own eyes. We tell them, and we like, you could do this, and this for free with no side effects, and but this might take a little longer, and this could even help you lose a little bit of weight. Now, there's something going on talking about weight. There's new medication for diabetes called Wegovy or Ozempic, and this medication seems to hijack this hormone, this chemical. You know, after you eat, after about 15 or 20 minutes after you eat, you kind of feel full, right? Satiated. Yeah, the body has taken its time, and the brain has now understood that you've eaten that amount of food, and usually you feel full after 15 or 20 minutes after you eat, independently of how much you ate. All right? Most of the time. If you eat a large meal or a regular meal and you wait 15 or 20 minutes, you'll feel probably just as full, just as satiated, okay? So if you want to go for seconds, I would say wait 15, 20 minutes and then decide, all right? Now, this medication, what it does, it hijacks that hormone, I think it's called leptin, and it tells your brain, it fools your brain into thinking that you're full all the time. And so a lot of people are getting on this medication. We had, at the hospital, we came out with a plan, with a 3-month, 12-week plan where we talk to patients about, healthy lifestyle and healthy eating and plant-based and exercise. We bring a physical therapist and then a nutritionist or a dietitian, and then I also have a session with them, and so we switch every week, right? And that group, we would have maybe 25, maybe we would have 25 times. We would have about 50 patients every cohort, 50 patients. With the advent of Ozempic, you know how many patients we're seeing now? Because the rule is that if you want to get on Ozempic, you have to get into this program. We quadrupled the number of patients that are now coming into this program because they want to get on this medication. We know that the program works because we keep statistics, and most people that come to the program before Ozempic, they all lose weight. I mean, if you imagine this, if you ate a plant-based diet and moved most days of the week, all right, just those two things, you would lose weight. I should say plant-based, but sometimes we end up eating like too much bread and pizza. Is pizza plant-based? Is a vegetarian pizza plant-based? It is. I mean, there's no meat in it, right? It's made out of wheat, white refined wheat that has no nutritional value. Imagine this. Who came up with the idea of depleting the kernel of wheat of the outer bran that has all the fiber and the center part that has all the protein, and then we make everything with white fluffy stuff. That white fluffy stuff is really bad for us. And how many products do we eat with the white fluffy stuff? Made out of wheat, white refined flour. How many products do we make? Pastas, bread, pizza, cookies, cakes, and then usually, French fries. French fries made out of flour, right? But I digress. We were talking about depression, Clinically depressed patients could take medication, but there are other ways that people could get help also. And so maybe we can be part of the new movement where we don't use the word depression, and we leave that for when a person is actually clinically depressed. And maybe we can say the person is sad, and maybe not necessarily depressed. All right, there's other illnesses that are sort of popular nowadays. Bipolar disorder. Has anyone heard of bipolar disorder, right? And so bipolar disorder, people are very quick to say, somebody gets mad and they lash out or they yell, "Oh, you're bipolar," they say, right? But they're not. They're just mad. They're not bipolar. And by the way, I just used the term that came out of my mouth that I don't like to use. We say, "Oh, he's bipolar or he's schizophrenic." But maybe, so this is encouragement number 2, we can be part of that group that where we don't label people because they have a certain illness. I mean, when somebody has cancer, we don't say he's cancer, right? That doesn't even make sense linguistically. But so when somebody has bipolar disorder, maybe we shouldn't label him as bipolar or schizophrenic. Because that brother, that sister, is many things in addition to having a diagnosable mental illness like bipolar disorder. So this person is a neighbor, he's a friend, he's a brother, he is a nephew, he is a husband, many things, right? So let's try to refrain from naming people by their illness that they may or may not necessarily have. Oh, you're bipolar, or she's bipolar. So he's a person that has bipolar disorder. So bipolar disorder is another mental illness, and this one, people have to have depression in the way I described it earlier, and they also have to have mania. And so when they have both, then they have bipolar disorder. So if we could see behavior on this imaginary line, sometimes we're a little bit happier, and sometimes we're a little bit sad. Does that mean we have bipolar disorder? No, right? So it's normal to be happy, and it's normal to be sad. So here is the imaginary line of sadness. Sometimes the sadness goes really, really low, and it lasts for more than 2 weeks. You're worthless, you want to die, you're not bathing, you're not eating, you don't have any energy, you have depression, all right? So that's below the normal line. So now, mania is the total opposite of depression. So with mania, people have so much energy. They're thinking so fast that their words cannot catch up with their thinking. And they also have so much energy that they don't need to sleep. They sleep very, very little. And sometimes they overdo things. The behaviors that we see, we can't see their thoughts racing, right? But we can see how many words they are producing very, very fast. Or sometimes they overdo things. Sometimes they overclean. They get to their house and they're cleaning, and they stay up very, very late, and they're cleaning and they're disinfecting, and then the next day there's a speck of dust, and then they clean the whole house because of that. So they are in a manic episode. I saw a friend that became manic, and he was studying the Bible so much that he wasn't bathing, he was hardly eating, and he was just reading the Bible all the time, and that's the only thing he could talk about, and his thoughts were racing, and he was speaking so fast, and so he was having a hyper-religiosity manic episode. Okay. So what is how do we help people that have bipolar disorder? Hi, Michael. Well, we have in the very same way, we have medication that can also help. But what do you think would happen if we give someone who has bipolar disorder and we give them an antidepressant? Now, the antidepressant is trying to lift their mood, right? And so sometimes when people are not diagnosed and they have bipolar disorder, but we only see a depressive episode, we haven't seen the other part, they get prescribed an antidepressant that lifts their mood, and then we make them manic because we went overboard. So it's very dangerous to medicate someone who we first see that we see them having a depressive episode, because they might have bipolar disorder, and we might send them into a manic episode. So sometimes it's difficult dealing with people that are manic, because people imagine if all of a sudden you have a lot of energy and you think you're accomplishing a lot of things. How would you feel? Most people feel good about that. And then if they tell them, brother, I think you might need, to see a mental health specialist, how do you think they would react? They would feel offended. They will feel insulted, right? So how do we deal with people that have bipolar disorder? Well, number one, we love them, right? Number one, we love them. Number two, we are very, very patient with them. And number 3 is we love them even more. And we need to be there for them. And yes, they should seek medical attention. There's a lot of things that we do for people that are clinically depressed or that have bipolar disorder. At the hospital, we try to, safety number 1, right? We try to make them safe. And sometimes we have to hospitalize them. And sometimes we have to hospitalize them even against their will. And that is always an interesting scenario. Sometimes when people need to come in, and maybe we have determined that they need to come in, and so we try to convince them that they need to come into the hospital. And so as a psychotherapist, I don't have the legal right to put somebody on a hold, but a psychiatrist does. And so what we usually do is I message the psychiatrist that's working with me. I said, I think this patient needs to come in. This is so-and-so. He's kind of like this. And he tells me, okay, he'll come in. He's on a hold. But we haven't told the patient yet that he's on a hold. And I try to convince them that they need to come in. And when they agree, well, then it's very easy. But when they don't agree, then I have this little button that I push. And then the police, the VA police, they're federal officers, by the way, and they carry guns. They're not security officers. They come in, and I tell them, well, I think this might be a good idea that you come into the hospital just a few days so that you can rest, and maybe we can take a look at your meds. And they're like, no, I think I'm going to leave. Well, brother, I think you need to stay. And then I open the door, and then the police knocks and says, everything okay? I said, yeah, Mr. So-and-so, he's going to come into the hospital. And then I start moving away because something's going to go down, and it usually does. And so then I just kind of nod to the police officers, and they're like, okay, well, let's go. We'll accompany you. We'll escort you over there. It's like, no, I don't want to come. And then they get in a fight, and then they have to get handcuffed, and then they're taken to the hospital. So not a very pleasant scenario sometimes, but we do that because of safety first, right? They have suicidal thoughts, they have a plan, they have the means on how to carry this out, and they have the intention on carrying this out. So we have to, or maybe sometimes homicidal ideation. Oh my goodness, I only have like 1 minute. And we haven't talked about PTSD. We haven't talked about schizophrenia. So, or ADHD or anxiety. Yes. Suffice it to say that I deal with a lot of patients that have PTSD, horrible illness. These people have been through a lot, a very traumatic experience, and they can't turn that off. For most people that go to war or experience a tragedy, an accident, or some other issues, we are able to turn that off and say, that happened in the past. For some people, they continue to relive that. And psychotherapy works very well with these people, but they can't turn that off. So that's kind of like PTSD. And then anxiety, I want to get to some Bible verses here, but then anxiety is an illness. It is one thing to be nervous, it's another thing to have a mental illness called anxiety. They have an inner inability to calm down. All right? So they can't, under those present circumstances, calm down. They could with some assistance. And breathing techniques and relaxation techniques that I practice with my patients works wonders for people that suffer from anxiety. So anxiety, the mind is racing and is trying to figure something out. There's a problem going on, but we can't understand what the result is going to be. So we continue to to dwell in, and it's like when a transmission slips. It's not really catching the gears. That's what's happening with the brain. And there is medication for anxiety too. I would say dangerous medication. This family of medication called benzodiazepines, and they are very addictive, and they can actually cause you to be so calm that it can actually slow down your heart to the point of not beating at all. And not beating hard is the definition of not being healthy, right? So it actually can kill you, and it's very highly addictive. So I'll finish with just a couple of verses here, because even though we have come a long ways, medications has its place. Very seldom, I would say, I like everything you guys said. You said only in extreme cases and only temporarily. God has given us the understanding of different psychotherapeutic approaches, like CBT, for example, cognitive behavioral theory, and MI, motivational interviewing, that can also do a lot of good. And I also agree that for any illness that we have, whether we have cancer or diabetes and the pancreas is not working well, or you have hypertension, or if you have depression, or if you have anxiety, I do believe that God has the power to heal us from anything. Right? God definitely has the power to heal us from everything. God has also given us humans the understanding on how to deal with cancer to some degree, right? How to deal with hypertension, how to deal with diabetes, how to deal with bipolar disorder, and we can take advantage of the wisdom that God has given these great minds that have been able to figure some of these things out. Philippians 4:6, do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses what? All understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds through Jesus Christ. Should I read that again? Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be known to God, and the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds through Jesus Christ. We need to go through Jesus Christ. Well, I'm sorry it took longer than expected. May God bless you richly, you and your minds, and may He guard your hearts.
For our closing song, let's all stand and let us sing hymn number 524, "'Tis So Sweet to Trust in Jesus." And Brother Eli and Brother Gabriel will pass the plate for the offering, for Sabbath School offering. Thank you.